all roads probably come back to sleep, and it's like, what actually helps you to sleep better? And exposure to sunlight is a major driver of that.
Welcome to the Optimum Human Podcast, the show that interviews the world's top experts in fitness, nutrition, mindset, and beyond. Let's get into the show.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Optimum Human Podcast. I'm Brian McKay, he's Claude Petroulis, and we are the Optimum Human Podcast. Today we've got a brilliant guest, for lack of a better adjective, Pat Davidson. Pat, how the hell are you this morning?
I'm doing very well, guys. Thank you very much for having me on, and I'm looking forward to this. It's a beautiful, wintry mixed day here in New York with chances of rain, snow, sleet, and slush. So couldn't be better.
Possible meatballs?
Hopefully that'd be amazing.
Meatballs, right on. I mean, hey, if you're gonna try and pack on some size this winter, meat is helpful. Pat, are you a vegan by any chance?
No, not even a little bit.
No,
I can't even imagine. Actually,
yeah, I know
that's some fate that's worse than like the inner realms of Dante's Inferno.
I wouldn't disagree.
Yeah, you know what? It's just it's a bleak idea. I mean, some people might have to do it for health reasons or whatever, but I mean,
I'll stop eating other animals when other animals stop eating other animals.
That is eloquently put.
Yeah, I'll make a pact with other predatory animals that have eyes in the front of their head. When they do it, I'll do it.
Right. But then you have to make a pact with worms too, that they're not going to eat you once you're not here.
That's a good point. No, they can chew on that.
Go ahead.
I'll go Shooter McGavin on them. They can choke on that, baby.
Nice.
Oh man. So Pat, for some of our listeners that aren't exactly versed in what you do, what do you do?
Well, I've had an interesting background coming up. Like I have a PhD in exercise physiology and a master's degree in strength and conditioning, and I've worked at a couple different colleges, universities, as a professor and doing some research. And during my time as a professor, I also was competing in strongman and coaching a team that competed in strongman at Springfield College. So, with that, it was just, I think that's an interesting combo because, I had a classroom full of kids that I was coaching, and I got to teach them about physiology and training science, and then train with them and compete with them in a sport. And I was able to go to a couple of world championships in strongman, and a few of the athletes have just continued on and won some world championships at the Arnold, and broken some world records and done some amazing things. So that's probably where people kind of know me from. And I don't work in a university setting anymore. I moved to New York City to work for Peak Performance, which was kind of looking to put together like an all-star team of rehab and sports science minds. And that didn't work out from a business perspective. So I'm working in New York City right now, and I'm working as an independent trainer, and also looking to establish a new business concept and start that up in New York.
Awesome. And is that Peak Performance? Is that Cressy, or who is that?
No, it was Joe Dowdell had Peak for quite a while, 15, 20 years, something like that. And some of the other guys that were going to be part of the newer version of Peak was Doug Kachigian, who is with Resilient Physical Therapy. A few guys who have brilliant physical therapists that worked under Bill Hartman and Alan Groover, just some incredible minds. So we had quite the all-star collection of up and coming sports science and rehab professionals that really never got a chance to do what we were supposed to do as a group. But that's neither here nor there.
Yeah, everything happens for a reason.
Maybe.
Now, well, Now, I'm just wondering, what made you want to get into this field and then eventually get your PhD? What's the story behind that?
I think that I was an athlete. Like growing up, that was probably sports made more sense to me than anything else. Like compared to, let's say, like personal relationships or anything like that. With human social interactions, everything's kind of gray area and nebulous, and I just didn't really understand it as a young kid. Versus like you get me on a field or a court or something like that, and it's just me versus you, and it's fair. And then I really like training that much even more because it's just like, hey, either you can run this distance in this time, jump this high, move this weight, or you can't. And there's a very simple explanation for whether you can or you can't. And there's also this kind of like, if you work hard and train hard, you get to see this linear progression and you can be proud of yourself and happy with your achievements. So it just like was a world that made sense to me and was very rewarding because I was pretty good as an athlete. And ultimately I just kept, I think that everybody that ends up in sports science or, training, when I've had a chance to talk to most of the top guys, like we're all these failed athletes that sort of believe that maybe there was this one thing that we could have done that would have like put us over the top, and then we could have played D1 or pro or whatever it was. And so you're like willing to try to learn and try anything, and it's probably garbage. Like the cream always rises to the top, and you end where you end for a reason. But I think it's a bunch of guys that were like very hard workers and just completely obsessed with trying to make it to the highest level of sports that they could. And that was me for sure. And I just kept wanting to learn more about whatever like secret training method I could find, or what the most important variable to develop would be for speed or power or whatever it would be that would allow me to make it to that next level. And before you know it, like I don't know, at some point I had this realization, like, I'm probably smarter than I am athletic. And there's actually a career in this, like for the long term. Whereas, like, I don't know, what would happen if I was like to go and be a professional mixed martial arts fighter? Like, I'd probably fight for a few years, make it to the UFC, and then like face a guy that's going to hurt me really bad. And maybe I'll make like $10,000 for that experience, which may or may not pay for the hospital bills. you know, so, and then it's kind of like, well, I'm in my mid 30s and like I've already competed at the Arnold for strongman, and that's the highest I can go. And I didn't make any money from it. So maybe I should look to do something that's like, a career and try to actually establish like a financial future. So I don't know. It's like these realizations of maturity that you have, where you're like, well, I guess I'm not ever going to be the athlete that I hoped I would be. But if I can just kind of hold on to this world in some level and spend time around other people that are training and dedicated and maybe athletic, that I can live vicariously through that experience.
Awesome. No, I mean, it's one of those situations where very few people that play sports find where that they can actually go pro. Like I don't know what the numbers are, but it's like, what is it, like 1 out of 10,000 or something? It's just that will even be considered for any sort of draft, and the numbers just will keep rising the higher the population goes. So definitely.
It's funny. I really don't have a problem with athletes making the kind of money that they make, because you're much more like statistically possible to become like a neurosurgeon or an astronaut than you are to be like a starting quarterback in the NFL. It's like they're more elite and special than pretty much anybody on the planet. And supply and demand, people actually want to watch it, so they get what they get. And like people have no idea how much of an outlier those guys are, that make it to the elite of the elite and are stars amongst the most incredible athletes in the world.
Yeah, they're mutants that have insane work ethic, and Also, people forget these guys put their bodies on the line. Like at 40, they're not going to be walking very well, you know. At
Yeah.
50, they're going to have pain all over their body. Like
Hmm.
it's like being in a modern day gladiator, and that's in most sports.
Yeah. I think if I if I got to pick what pro sport I could be great at and play, at the highest level, I would probably choose golf, quite honestly. And because it's the only sport that has the senior tour. It's like, hey, you're old, but here's this other group of old guys you can keep playing with, and you can still earn millions of dollars. It's like it's kind of crazy. Can you imagine like the senior NFL? Like nobody would anybody want to watch it would be the first thing, but
I
like
mean,
somehow
it's pretty similar to the CFL, isn't it?
oh,
Get
that
on
might
your
be
Brian.
what it is.
Don't slander. Don't slander us Canadians, eh?
Hey, I am one, so that's the only reason I can.
That's how you can get away with it.
Right. That's
right,
my
all right.
rationalization anyway.
Sure.
No, he's just a hoser, eh?
Yeah. But yeah.
We're
I mean, it's
We're gonna have to clean this conversation up with a Zamboni if it keeps going this way.
Oh, come on.
Nice.
That's heading into dad joke territory now.
Hey, not afraid.
Not afraid. Brian
no
isn't either.
shame, no shame. So Pat, let's just jump right into this thing. You, your most recent project that I know of anyway has been your book Mass, and I'm learned a little bit about it doing research for this podcast, but for people that have never heard of Mass, can you kind of give us an idea of where it came from and kind of a little bit about it?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So, Mass is a book that I wrote a little over a year ago at this point, probably about a year and a half, and it's a 16-week training cycle that's put together for the person to be able to go through, and I think it's generally considered to be a tremendously challenging collection of workouts for whoever it is that's doing it. And people have gotten very good results from going through the experience. But it's kind of interesting, the actual story for its genesis. When I was with Peak, we did a lot of projects with Men's Health. And Men's Health was actually going to do this really big story on the new Peak gym that was going to be built. And they were going to call it like the gym of the future and do like a multi-part story on it. And with another kind of unrelated men's health project that Peak and I were involved with, it was they had a new intern that started at Men's Health, and he was a former college cross-country runner who had never lifted weights before in his life, and he was about like 5'9", 5'10", and like somewhere around like 125 to 130 pounds.
Oh man.
And so I got
Built like me.
Built like Brian, yeah.
So, Brian, I think Mass would be a pretty good program for you.
Absolutely.
So I get an email from the editor describing this intern and saying that they thought it would be a really cool idea to see how much mass they could put on this kid during his 16-week internship. And could I write the program that would, create that? So I put together the program for this particular kid, and I had like one day to meet him and try to show him how to do exercise and stuff like that, which is just like, for me, like I'm a very detail-oriented person when it comes to biomechanics and like technique and all that kind of stuff. So I was just thinking to myself, like, I can't teach anybody how to do, like a wide variety of big resistance training exercises at a high level in one day. Like, I'm not going to be able to monitor this kid. Like, I'm going to just assume he's going to do everything wrong. So I need to make a program that will give him results and not get him hurt and try to make sense for who he is as a person. So that, it's kind of interesting that the entire book was based off of a program for one person who was a complete novice, never had lifted weights before in his entire life, and was essentially going to be doing this in a completely unsupervised manner. so, I put it together, 16-week program broken up into 4 different 4-week phases. And, he went on and put on somewhere along the lines of 19 pounds of muscle mass during the 16-week experience, which is enormous, but even more so when you consider the fact that his starting body weight was sub 130 pounds.
Right. That's almost a 20% gain in muscle.
Yeah, I mean, it's just kind of like preposterous in some ways when you really think about it. So the thing is that like I'm the kind of person that if I'm going to ask someone to do something very difficult, I'm definitely going to try to go through the experience with you. And in part because I want to be able to give you the best advice that I possibly can for what you're experiencing right now. So I started doing the same program at the same time. And before you know it, like a couple other trainers at Peak started doing the program with me. So we had a group of like 3 people doing it. And then there was this intern going through the program. And I remember, like, I think we posted a video on Facebook of us doing the workout. And then a couple other strength coaches in my social media network were like, "What are you doing?" And so I just sent them over the program. And before you know it, like, you've got like a few strength coaches around the country posting videos of going through this workout and just showing like before and after pictures of them like dying on the floor in the aftermath of it. So, it was, we were probably like 8 weeks into the program, and the guy from Men's Health sent me another interview or another email, and he was like, "Dude, I don't know what is going on with this kid's body, but it is changing at a rate that I've never seen an organism go through. The workouts you're putting him through are pretty crazy, but I've just never seen anything like this." So they were saying, like, we're thinking about calling this like the best new workout of the year, and they wanted to run that story in parallel with the Peak story. So I was like, yeah, this sounds fantastic. And quite honestly, like, I just was thinking to myself, like, well, if Men's Health is going to do this like enormous free advertising for me and calling something the best new workout of the year, I think I would be an idiot to not try to capitalize on this,
right?
And actually have a product to go along with it, because I might actually be able to sell something and make some money. So I with that in mind, I actually just sat down and kind of wrote the book out and put it together, and I think that it's just kind of grown organically from there. We sell it through rebelperformance.com, and we don't have any kind of like advertising or marketing budget, but people have done the program. They've gotten amazing results. They have posted their videos on social media of like doing the workouts, and other people are just like, "Whoa, what are you doing?" So it's just sold through like a grapevine kind of organic network of primarily people who work in the fitness industry, who have been doing the workout. And I just like that it's kind of like it's a program that has worked for someone who is a complete novice. It's a program that has worked for people that have been lifting for a long time. It's just a good human developmental program involving lifting weights that will be very satisfying for the person that is actually going through the workouts, and seems to just pack a lot in the way of results.
Yeah, absolutely. I was gonna ask you about the training age or but obviously you've kind of answered that. But yeah, man, I'm looking forward to picking it up and checking it out.
It's funny because we always talk about like individualization and like getting away from cookie cutter workouts and stuff like that. And I think that, that's true. That's like something that I believe strongly in. But at the same time, like, I think people just get into this problem of terminal uniqueness. They think that they're this special little snowflake that's somehow different than all others. And we just get to this like over analytical, over intelligent state. And it's like, what you probably need is like a really good hard dose of hard work and just turning off your head and sweating and pushing and just getting after it. And I think that's what the program is. It's very simple. Literally anybody can do it, regardless of like your training age, and it's gonna work for you if you just give it a shot and don't try to overthink it.
Yeah, that's definitely something that myself and I'm sure many others struggle with, is just being way too in your head and overthinking things.
Like from competing in strongman, it was like I'll tell you, like some guys that I've lost to were not the smartest guys in the world. Like you might lose to a coal miner from Kentucky, and it's kind of like, well, shit, I'm like this guy with a PhD in exercise science, and I train in this like incredible training environment with these other smart people, and like this guy who I think is still drunk from like bourbon just beat me, and I think he's been like training in the coal mine, like, you know what I mean? And it's just like you hear what other guys do for their programs, and you're like, are you kidding? That's your program? Like, that's not even that doesn't even make sense. Like, there's no thought in what, but they beat you. So you quickly have to come to these realizations, like, man, maybe I don't really know anything, like maybe all of this stuff is accurate. Like, I'm not knocking science. I think science is the way to go, but like, we can be so smart that we just completely screw ourselves over. And, either you got it or you don't, and either you work hard or you don't. And it really does come down to simple things like that. Like you're either making progress or you're not. You're motivated or you're not. And I think that this particular program, like when I get into describing why I think this thing works, it's not for the reasons that a lot of other people classically go with. Oh, it's developing rate of force development in this special vector. And, it's at this exact percentage that is magical and unlike all other ways of lifting weights that has ever come before it. And it's like, no, I don't think that's why this thing works. I think it works because it's like, each workout in itself is challenging. And if you manage to get through the workout, it's a very rewarding experience, and it will motivate you to try to beat your last performance. And if you are beating your last performance, you're going through the oldest trick in the book, which is progressive resistance exercise. And it's as simple as that. Like, are you making progress? And, most programs, I think, are just so damn boring that nobody wants to really make progress. It's not a big deal. I mean, it is to some extent, but it's not like what the progress feels like with this thing. It's like, I don't know, I've read all of the classical training books, the periodization textbooks and, all of the block training schemes and things like that. And in some ways, those are like, Atari version workouts. And it's like, guys, there is like PlayStation 3 or 4 or whatever the hell we're up to at this point in time. Like, things have progressed, and like there's like people that are incredible artists out there that are making these incredibly beautiful workouts that are the, kind of the renditions of the science, like brought to life in the form of art that blend it into like fun and awesome at the same time.
I think Brian and I both have to try this and, get jacked, right, Brian?
Absolutely.
Because I do the whole overthinking too. It's just brutal because you think, well, I'm going to add this, I'm going to modify this, and then you're working at like 70% or 80% instead of, outputting 90, 95 and just putting out all you've got, really.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no replacement for just lifting heavy shit, and a lot of it.
Right. But the problem is that as you get older, I think especially like you get into the third decade of life, and like I'm just like when I was 18, I would be like really fired up, like, yeah, I can't wait to lift weights. And now I'm like, oh God, I have to lift weights. Like, oh geez, like, oh, I guess I can drag myself in there and do it. Oh man. But like when all of a sudden it's kind of like, oh, man, I came so close to finishing this thing. I think I can finish it this time. It's a different kind of motivational technique.
Yeah, it really reminds me. I was a roofer when I was in my late teens and early 20s, and just being able to actually see what you've completed at the end of the day is just, it's rewarding beyond anything else that I can really think of.
Yep. I had similar experiences working with like construction oriented landscape. So, and I think that everybody needs to work manual labor, quite honestly. Like if you're going to be a strength coach, you should probably work manual labor because you get to see what volume and reps actually do for strength of young organisms. Like it makes you a hell of a lot stronger. And just being able to like build a wall at the end of the day, you're like, wow, I actually put that thing together. Like my hands hurt, I'm sore from head to toe. I can't believe I have to wake up tomorrow and do this all over again.
Right.
But yeah, I put this thing together. That's kind of cool.
Absolutely. So I was kind of curious as to, I don't know how to really phrase this question because whatever, but what is kind of your take on training for performance and then balancing that with longevity as well? Because a lot of people will train super hard, and by the time they hit, 30, 35, like they're all fucked up and
CrossFit.
Totally.
Sorry.
Yeah. So I think that, the best experience I've ever had with listening to speakers talk specifically on this topic was listening to Val Nasedkin and Roman Fomin talk with like an omega wave oriented presentation, like their windows of trainability. And they were essentially saying, like, if you look at the data, Olympic athletes and professional athletes die younger than sedentary people. And it's kind of like the cost of physiological adaptation is so high for the training that they go through that it actually is going to just cause essentially free radical oxidation related damage at a level that's excessive. And it's kind of like the question comes down to is it possible to reach the levels of physiological output necessary for Olympic gold medal or elite of the elite professional athlete without killing the person younger in the process? And I would say that we don't know yet because it's still speculative thought processes. All we know is that they die younger than regular people do. And what those guys are saying is that it probably comes down to ratios of aerobic versus non-oxidative output for your physiology. And you want the organism to be able to put out the kinds of fitness expressions and outputs that are necessary. If you're looking to play wide receiver in the NFL and you run a 4.8 40, you might be a great guy and every play in the book, but you're just too slow. You can't play receiver in the NFL unless you're somewhere in the 4.6 or slightly faster level, and then you're fast enough. And it's these questions of what is strong enough to be a professional athlete, what is fast enough, what is. So, you need to be able to get to the point where you're fast enough, you're strong enough, you have the right kinds of physiological outputs that are desired and necessary to play in the sport that you're looking to excel at. The key, though, would be to try to reach those outputs with your physiology running more through aerobic means as opposed to non-oxidative anaerobic means. And when you're looking at athletic performances, you're always trying to find the compensatory strategy that the athlete is utilizing. And typically those compensatory strategies are the things that are going to break people down. When you're talking about biomechanics, it's kind of easy to imagine that. If your pitching technique is, all kinds of funky, you're likely to blow out a UCL in your elbow. But you can also think of shifting towards a glycolytic strategy as being a compensatory strategy that the athlete is using, this time just not in the biomechanical realm, but in the energy systems realm. When you're thinking about the way that you want most athletes to perform from an energetic standpoint, you want them to perform either in a phosphagen manner or an aerobic manner. You want either like just that straight up creatine phosphate shuttling of phosphates to ADP taking place in the cytosol, or you want to be manufacturing new ATP through ATP synthase in the electron transport chain. So it's like you're always looking for ways that you can improve the functioning of the mitochondria. You're looking for mitochondrial biogenesis as a critical variable for development, and you're also looking for how can I actually tighten the activities of the respiratory proteins in the mitochondria so that I have the most efficient electron tunneling and protein gradient management that I possibly can. Because ultimately, when you look at longevity of organisms, you're looking to really manipulate the respiratory proteins of the mitochondria and just keep that electron movement going as quickly as you possibly can, going through those cytochrome proteins and getting to ATP synthase and having that machine spin and rephosphorylate ATP. I mean, that is the secret to long life, quite honestly, right there. And it's just that if you are an elite athlete, you've probably tried so hard and worked so intensely and gone into levels of stress to where you have left the comfort of the electron transport chain and made up for it with excesses in the glycolytic machinery.
I mean, it makes sense when you think about it. Runners generally last longer than like, let's say, power lifters. I mean, that's also due to loads and stuff. But if you look at the repetitive stuff, there's still masters runners, right? And masters power lifters, I mean, it's not as popular, but a lot of folks just break down or just aren't around anymore.
Yeah.
So,
and it's partly also like, because you could train really smart as a power lifter, you know, because like it's sort of like these phosphogenic kinds of activities, as opposed to like, you know, like a 400-meter race would be incredibly glycolytic. Although, I mean, it's different. It's just, it's too, you don't want to get into that kind of argument. Like, I would greatly prefer to just kind of track somebody over time with actual objective testing, like see where their system's at with like a device like an Omega Wave, and then actually measure them with things like a Moxie unit, which I don't know if you guys have used or familiar with, but
haven't heard of it myself.
So like the Moxie is like a technology that you can put a patch right on the working muscle, and you can see how much oxygen is actually in the muscle. It uses some infrared technology to be able to estimate that. But you can really get a sense of, like, rather than speculate on what training method is necessarily best, or like, oh, you need to follow this timing protocol or anything like that, like you can actually just measure the amount of oxygen present in the working muscle, and that's probably a really good indicator of what kind of strategies the muscle's using to accomplish the mechanical work that it's performing. So I think that's always the next step, is it's like, from a theoretical level, we believe that when you have the majority of your tissues functioning oxidatively, you're going to do well as an organism, and that's going to promote longevity. And now we do have the ability to actually look inside tissues and tell you what's going on in there. So that's just where it goes. And then, of course, you can actually objectively measure it and see if it actually makes a difference or not.
That makes sense. And just, I usually think when I see athletes kind of, hit the end of their road, so to speak, there's that old saying, I don't know if it's from Blade Runner or somewhere else, but the light that shines twice as bright burns twice as fast. Mm-hmm. And if you're going beyond, regular human performance, you're going to pay the price. And folks just don't realize you can't be, the top guy in the NFL, right, for 40 years. That's why, like we said, we don't
unless
see
you're
any...
Jaromir Jagr, who.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that guy's an android. Okay,
although he's also not in the NFL, but anyways.
Well, close enough. I mean, it's just adding some equipment.
it's a great topic, and I think that it's the topic in some ways because I was kind of talking about it with the strongman guys. Like I've just seen so many different training methods and approaches work. There's millions and millions of ways to skin the cat from like athletic development, but can you figure out the one that won't kill the person? That's the question I've got. What's the least costly way that you can get the most bang for your buck? And I don't think that means don't work hard. See, I think that's where people get thrown off. I think that a lot of it comes down to like you have to understand the actual physiology of these cellular components. Like if you understand the physiology of mitochondria at a tremendously high level, maybe you can do something about those critically important structures that can go awry as we go through the aging process. And I think that when we go down the lines and the discussion points of like what fosters great mitochondrial health, you get into some really weird stuff, okay? And that's where you start sounding like kind of a lunatic. And
I kind of want to get into this.
Well, I think that it's lifestyle management based things, and I think that the paleo people get knocked all over the place because a lot of their ideas are pseudoscientific, but I think that they might be along the right tracks. So I think that when you get into I think that lifestyle management is going to be the biggest driver of whether or not you're hurting someone's longevity as an athlete, more than the kinds of training approaches that you're using. And I'm not saying training isn't important. I'm just saying that as long as you've got a semi-smart training system, let's focus more on how you're going through life. Like, do you spend all day, every day indoors? Like, do you never see the sunlight? I think that sunlight exposure and vitamin D levels is a critical one, and I don't want to open that can of worms too much in terms of like full spectrum UV exposure, but it seems to be a big deal that smart people are talking about as being like a major player, and I just know a lot of smart people that try to block blue light exposure from things like electronic devices and televisions and computers and all that kind of stuff. And I think that when you get into nutrition, it's huge. But I think that you have to respect the fact that mitochondria seems to be a common characteristic of pretty much all life, except for prokaryotic organisms and things like that. But we're sort of in the same family as plants. Like the sun sort of runs the show, and mitochondria have specialized types of chemicals in them that are light collecting chemicals, and protons and electrons run the show inside of mitochondria, and those are just these tiny elements of charge that are coming as like little energetic participants. And look, all the energy that runs the show on this planet is coming from the sun ultimately. Mm-hmm. And circadian rhythm is such a big deal. Like exposure to sunlight at the right time and then removal of light at the right time is really critical when it comes to mitochondrial health. So I think that's stuff that we have to look at for a longevity based discussion, even more than the training or the nutritional stuff in some ways.
And it makes sense, because if you're not sleeping or if you're not getting vitamin D, you're not going to be anywhere near your peak, right? Like you're going to be burning the candle at both ends. You're going to feel like shit, perform like shit. I mean, you might perform okay for a bit, but and especially
eventually you'll break down.
Yeah. Like the sunlight thing I find is huge. Like there's nothing that replaces vitamin D.
All roads probably come back to sleep, and it's like, what actually helps you to sleep better? And exposure to sunlight is a major driver of that.
So it's not sleeping pills is the best.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, there's another compensatory strategy. It's like, but it's kind of like, well, if you look at the behaviors that people do, like I think a great book that everybody should probably read is Homeostasis, Allostasis, and the Cost of Physiological Adaptation. but it basically says that behavior is driven by physiology. As people get cranky, and it's kind of like, well, what does this person need? They might need to like experience movement, or maybe they're hungry or thirsty, or these things. Like, people don't even know why they do most of the things that they do, but it's probably your physiology that's pushing you towards the behaviors that you're doing. And it's kind of like a lot of these compensatory behaviors that we're doing in modern Western civilization, like, excessive amounts of alcohol or sleeping pills or things like that. There are these strategies that we're using to try to promote things that we're looking for, like a parasympathetic response or, inhibition of tissues. And it's kind of like, well, why can't you have that in the first place? And maybe it's your mitochondrial health. Maybe it's your lack of normalcy in terms of the way that our species evolved over, who knows, 80,000 years, longer than that, hundreds of thousands of years, to exist outdoors in a planet, and to experience like a multitude of sensory information from light to temperature to wind and touch and different terrains of ground, varieties of food, eating seasonally. All of those sorts of things are probably a big deal that are very hard to actually measure scientifically, but doesn't mean that they're actually wrong just because we can't objectively measure those things as of yet in a laboratory.
Oh, it's true. And if you have you heard of Terry Walls by any chance?
No, I haven't.
So Terry Walls, she did a great TED Talk. I think it was called Minding Your Mitochondria. And she had a very severe stage of MS. And just through healing her mitochondria through diet and lifestyle management, she was able to reverse her MS. And I mean, to me, it was amazing. Like, she was in a special chair where she was kept at like a 45-degree angle so her body wouldn't hurt. And then she's out like riding horses again after. Like, I'm like, holy shit. Like, so
yeah, it's profound stuff, and a lot of times it's like, what's the rate limiting variable from a physiology standpoint? And is any, like, when I boil things down to like what are the most critical topics to try to learn about, I think you've got a genome, a brain, and mitochondria as like some of the big power players. And if we can figure out the physiology that really determines the functioning of those three areas, I think we'll go a long way in terms of actually being able to improve people's lives. And when you talk about sports, maybe see actual performance changes and longevity changes.
Yeah, totally. Brian, any other questions before we lead into our wrap up?
I mean, several hundred. But yeah, we'll definitely have to do a round two. This has been quite enlightening, and
I think Brian's gotten through like maybe 1/10 of his questions that he had prepared.
Well, maybe we could do like a lightning round, and I'll just try to be real fast.
Ooh.
Okay.
What do you think about that, Brian? Do you think that would be possible with his questions? Your answers might be shorter than his questions. Let's put it that way.
Well, I'm like super curious. Can we get like one or two?
Well, I mean,
do it.
All right, yeah. I mean, so actually, I was kind of curious as to your take on my idea when we were talking about kind of the balance of performance and longevity, and my take on things is really, yeah, this is long. Basically, we bring in energy production. Do we use that energy toward muscle tissue, or do we use it toward organ tissue? And really, I think it's about balancing the two. Yeah, we want to be strong in muscles, but we also need to send some energy to our vital organs. So.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's a great area, and I think that Sapolsky gets into some of that stuff when you listen to some of his lectures and read like Zebras Don't Get Ulcers, and it's kind of like, from what I say, I don't know if this is scientific or not, and I don't even remember where I heard this, but part of it is like which part of your brain you're really like constricting from a blood vessel standpoint, and that seems to match where you're constricting from a peripheral tissue standpoint as well. So it's kind of like when you are operating more from like a reactive standpoint, like let's say stress rises in your life, and that's going to make you more of like you'll shift more to your hindbrain. The more that stress is like imposing itself upon you in your life, you'll leave kind of the top parts of your brain, the cortex, the outermost layers, and you'll kind of constrict the blood vessels going there, and you'll send more and more blood downward towards the hindbrain, which is much more reactive. And when I mean that by like just sort of like stereotyped behaviors associated with our ancestors. So like more in the way of fight or flight type of activities. And if you're in those kinds of brain functions, you would also be much more in the way of your muscles, your skeletal muscles, and much less in the way of, sending signals to your internal organs. So it's kind of like, generally speaking, if you never get a chance to relax and socialize, and this is getting into like some polyvagal type stuff, and I don't know if you guys are familiar with the polyvagal theory book, or if the listeners are, but again,
nope,
another
definitely
book
gonna have to check it out.
Yeah, it's a huge, important book, and it just goes to this realm of like we are fundamentally these social creatures, and we're able to shift into these parasympathetic experiences of relaxation, growth, anabolism when we're able to engage in these really social types of atmospheres and laugh and feel as though we're comfortable with the people that we're surrounded by. And that would ultimately open up more parts of the cortex of the brain. And so I don't know if it's necessarily causal, but maybe correlative in terms of like if you're constricting the cortex blood vessels, you're shifting more to use of the hindbrain, which seems to occur under stress. And that would probably be associated more with like sending out stress hormones like glucocorticoids. And of course, that's like a mobilization strategy. But chronic glucocorticoid elevation is like the bane of all of our health conditions. But you might be sending more blood flow to peripheral tissues. Versus the other way around where you're comfortable, you're parasympathetic, you're relaxed, you're going to shift more into, kind of rest and digest, and you'll send more of a fluid bolus towards the internal organs of rest and repair and recuperation.
I think that was a great lightning question and answer. Holy shit. Brian, anything else? Anything a little bit easier to digest? Because I'd love to do a round two, and we can definitely book it up soon.
Absolutely.
Because I have a ton of questions myself, and we could be here all day, but I think family and friends would probably get pissed off at all of us.
Yes,
they're totally overrated at the holiday time. Everybody knows that. Like, screw that.
Nobody
Let's
says
make
that
this
though.
about us.
That's true. All right. Well, if you guys get Cole,
Right. For Christmas I just buy a bag of Kingsford and like hand out a block to everyone.
A block of what?
Are you guys familiar with the Krampus? Like this?
Oh yeah.
I'd never heard of this thing until like a year ago, and then I saw Krampus-based like cards and paraphernalia all over the place. I was like, where is this Krampus coming from? But it kind of looks like a Christmas devil.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's because that movie got so popular. It was like 2014 and 2015, like the Krampus or whatever. And he was, like,
I don't
stealing
think
children.
Yeah, no,
I never
I'm
saw
totally
that.
lost.
Yeah, no, it's like literally the Christmas devil. Like if you're naughty, the Krampus will come visit you, and he's not going to bring you coal or any gifts. He's going to take you away and eat you
The
or whatever.
Grinch on steroids.
Yeah, I didn't. Yeah. Yes. I really didn't know there was a movie for the Krampus. That makes
there's a few
so
now.
much more sense.
There's a few now, yeah. But
Just thought
that one,
he,
it kind of started it all. No, I think it's from like Norse mythology, and then somebody's like, "Hey, it'd be great if we made a horror movie," and then
Right. Let's monetize this.
Yeah, let's monetize
Well, it was
it.
kind of like the Mask concept. Like, hey, we might have something here. So
you know what? It's all about capitalizing at the right time, and if you can do it, fucking power to you. Did I just swear? Oops, not really.
Yeah, I did too.
That's all right.
That's all right.
Yeah,
I'm
but
not offended.
yeah, all right. I'm glad we're all good. Screw the listeners. I mean,
So if anybody's wondering, mass equals Krampus.
mass equals Krampus. Yeah, if
Yeah.
you follow the program, you will turn into Krampus. But that's not a bad thing. Krampus
No,
is
it's
kind
not.
of cool.
He
Might
had a
change your
very
life.
long forked tongue, which could come in very handy from time to time. Trying to make friends around the holiday season.
Oh man.
Oh, not touching that one.
You're welcome. You're welcome for that
Absolutely.
one. That's insight.
You know what? I think each time we do a podcast, we lose one more listener. So we'll finally, like, by episode, I don't know, like 200, we'll be like negative listeners.
Right.
We'll have Apple trying to shut us down.
If it's
that's-
just you guys listening, does that make it a negative? Like, is that how that works?
Yeah,
we don't listen to this.
yeah, that's true. How do we listen to this shit? We already have to live through it. Well, no, I'm messing with you. But so Pat, I think we had some wrap-up questions because Brian's questions are obviously a little intense. So first one, Brian, ask it, the Optimum Human one. I always forget how to word it.
Yep. So if when you hear the Optimum Human, what is the who's the first person that comes to mind, or what is the set of ideals or principles that come to mind?
You're not allowed to say Krampus.
Man, that's too bad. I actually wasn't clever enough to think of Krampus at that point in time. You know, a couple of, like, all right, first of all, like, I'm a huge, like, a-hole New England Patriots fan, so I really desperately want to say Tom Brady is the answer to this, in large part because I feel as though he's the greatest collection of molecules that's ever been assembled in this or any known universe in the past, present, or future. I mean, he is the Bret the Hitman Hart of this thing, in terms of being the best there is, the best there was, and the best there ever will be. But, you know, I'll step outside of that normal sphere of discussion and thought process. And I would have to say probably like LeBron James. Like, I mean, how can you really mess with that? Although if you've never seen what his feet look like, you should definitely Google image LeBron James' feet, because it's like a talon on top of his foot that represents his pinky toe. I don't even understand how it happened. But, I mean, when you really think about him, like, he's just such a specimen at, like, 6'8", 265 pounds. He is reported to be the fastest guy in the NBA from end line to end line. You know, he's got, like, a 40-inch plus vertical jump at that size. He plays more minutes per year than anybody. His fitness level is off the charts. I've gotten into multiple arguments with soccer people because I believe that LeBron James, if he decided to play soccer right now, would be the greatest soccer player that's ever lived, mainly because all you would have to do would be to cross the ball across the middle of the field, and he would head it in every single time because he would just jump like 3.5 feet higher than everybody else. So I don't understand why soccer does not do that. It's like the evolution of a sport. It's like bringing in like an eighth inning lefty specialist in baseball, just like a super tall guy that can out jump everybody and head the ball in on crosses. Like, seems obvious to me, but what do I know?
I just Googled LeBron James' feet, and holy crap! Do you think that helps or hinders him? What is that? Like,
I don't know. It's like the Velociraptor claw that it like taps to like intimidate the things that it's trying to kill. Maybe he taps it and scares people.
You know
like,
what? I think just being 6'8", what was it, 260? Or,
Right.
Yeah.
265,
yeah, I think
whatever.
that might be enough.
That's enough.
This is extra though. Holy crap! That's like, I would figure it would be painful to run around and play basketball like that. But hey,
I mean, a lot of those guys end up, their careers come short because of foot problems in the NBA. You know, it just seems to be like a common thing, and who knows why. You know, you could say high tops, but I don't know. That just doesn't sound right to me. Early specialization, but I don't know if early specialization led to LeBron James. I'm all for it. It's like some of these guys, it's hard to fathom, and like I would just like to stand next to him just so I could appreciate just like how large an organism that dude is, and then like to be that large and that fast and that mobile and agile and explosive. It just doesn't sound fair. So it's hard for me to think of anybody that could really like trump him. It's funny. Like I think that football probably has the biggest talent pool in the U.S. by a large margin, with basketball probably second. And it's kind of ruined USA Olympics in some ways. Like USA track and field has taken major hits because why would anybody want to do track and field when they could just play in the NFL? Like nobody pays attention to Olympians except for every 4 years.
And they don't get paid like NFL players get paid.
No.
Yeah, nothing. Yeah.
Like that's also what Olympic weightlifting coaches say. They say, you know what, like if everything was equal, we'd have some of the best lifters in the world, but they're all, chasing a football.
And if Warren Sapp decided he was going to be a weightlifter back in the day, he would have broken every record imaginable. Like it would have been silly. So yeah, it's kind of like I think our best athletes in this country because I've got to base it on the U.S. because I don't really know what's going on international. Like probably our football players and basketball players, and it's kind of like, well, which guy jumps out as being like the most obviously like athletically dominant individual in either of those sports? And I just can't think of anybody that would come close to LeBron.
And just to bring back to your point of standing next to him and just seeing, the difference, because how tall are you, Pat?
5'6".
Okay, so I'm 6'2", and I stood beside the mountain, Hapfor Bjornsson. I'm sure you're familiar with him. I looked like his
You look like a
grandson.
child.
Yeah, I looked like a child. I'm 6'2". I think I was 190 in that picture.
Yeah.
I looked like a little bitch, and he looked like he looked like, honestly, like CGI. And I'm like, I look at the pictures nowadays, and I'm like, holy crap, this guy could kill me with one hand. So yeah, my ego kind of got shattered because here I'm like, oh, I'm tall, I'm like, no.
I'll tell you, one of my favorite experiences in life was, the Strongman World Championships are held at the Arnold Classic in March every year.
In Ohio, right?
Yeah, it's in Columbus. So I can remember like flying out from there, and I competed in the 175 class, which is like basically like the pit bull division. Like it's just like, okay, here's like these like all kind of 5'6" to 5'9" guys that look like human versions of pit bulls with necks the same width as their hips. And so like we're all going to the airport though, like to leave because the strongman competition got over on the same day. And it's just a funny combo because it's like these tiny guys and these huge guys. Like you got guys like Robert Oberst, who's like, 6'8", like 450 pounds, and you got the mountain, and we're all going through the airport like custom or like TSA line at the same time.
Yeah.
And the airport, like the TSA people, like they were all just looking around like, what the hell is going on here?
Right.
Like there's these.
What would we do if they decided they were unhappy?
I mean,
what if they don't want to
can't
take their shoes off?
They couldn't fit through the metal detector though on this thing. And then there were like us, like the midgets next to them. Like, why are you guys like part of like a circus operation or something? Like,
oh man.
But yeah, the mountain is like, I mean, that is a large dude. Like Brian Shaw. Like, you think about how big Brian Shaw is. He's 6'9", 440 pounds. Like,
it's terrifying.
It really is. Have you seen the video of him breaking the 100-meter Concept 2 rower world record?
No.
Oh my God, it's terrifying. It's just like it's like another species. Like I don't know how that machine didn't just like disintegrate with the force production he was throwing down on it.
I saw him doing CrossFit, and the bar looked like a toothpick in his hands.
Yeah, it's crazy. Like I've stood next to a few of those guys just in competing at the Arnold with, like not in the same stage as them, but just being near them, and they're really scary. It's like
I know.
It's like being on safari or something like that. You're like too close to the elephants.
They're mutants. It's amazing.
I love it. It's just kind of like the international left tackles on drugs. Like, okay, this is what happens with all the left tackles that we would search for around the world and putting them on all the drugs you can imagine.
They're quite a sight to behold. Brian, it's your choice for wrap-up questions.
All
I
right,
mean, you had
let's hit
300, so
right. Let's hit a few and we'll wrap up. I definitely want to be respectful of your time. So, first
I
one
don't.
is who. All right, fair enough. Uh, who would you like to hear on this podcast, and what would you want to hear them talk about?
That's a great question. You know, I really, I would love. I don't know if you'd be able to get him, but I love Robert Sapolsky. You know, like
Mhm.
I don't think because the problem is he's not interested in exercise. I don't think. Um, but I've been recently going through some of his lectures on neurophysiology and behavior, and it's just such fascinating stuff. I actually heard Joel Jameson talking about this recently, but just like, what is his take on exercise? Like, does he have anything worth saying? Because I don't know, like, I'm always curious to hear the outsiders' viewpoints. Like, really smart outsiders oftentimes say these like incredibly enlightening things that just are so basic, but like we don't think about them because we're so on the inside that it would be amazing. Um, but who else would I really like to hear? Like I love listening to Joel Jameson. I think he's just always dropping like incredibly useful information. And mm, let's see, like the other guy, like I mentioned, the polyvagal theory, Porges, who wrote that, Stephen Porges. Like again, the problem is I think a lot of these guys are just like these researchers. So maybe a researcher that's a really smart guy that connects with people. Jason Kaliwa at Central Carolina or Coastal Carolina University. Unbelievably smart guy. Like really, involved with like high level research on protein synthesis and hypertrophy, but smart guy, funny guy, gets training, good dude.
awesome. Well, we got a nice list.
Yeah, that's the first time we've had more than one answer, so that's love it. Now, if you had to rescue three books from a fire, what books would they be?
Oh, that's like impossible.
Hey, we ask the tough questions here, man.
Yeah. Man, I'll tell you, I think so highly of the book The Brain's Way of Healing by Norman Doidge.
Oh yeah.
Um, I would recommend it. It's the sequel to The Brain That Changes Itself. And I think The Brain's Way of Healing, like everybody talked about The Brain That Changes Itself when that came out, but nobody really talks too much about The Brain's Way of Healing. And man, that book is loaded, so good. Um,
Yeah,
what
that book
else?
is the
Like,
truth. Like, I mean, it was. I was just like surprised that you don't hear more of the techniques being applied because this stuff is changing lives. Like,
yeah, it really is. That pawns machine that they're talking about at
oh yeah,
University of Wisconsin, like that thing sounds make believe.
yeah. Like,
Um,
like I'm like I gotta see it in order to see that it's real because it like stimulates your tongue and then you can see.
yeah,
Like what the hell?
Right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Makes blind people able to see. Like, are you kidding me? Like that's a thing.
Yeah.
Um, what else? Like from a training book, I think it's always good to talk about some kind of a training book. Let me think. Like, what did I get more out of than anything else? I suppose Super Training. You
Super
know,
training. You actually read that?
yeah.
I
One of
mean, I
the
have it on my bookshelf, but I just have that for ego purposes.
I think it's worth, like it's almost like a rite of passage. Like you just need to to go through that thing one time and make your underlines and highlights and all that stuff. In part because I think that everything that we think of as new, it's like, man, it's all been done. It's all in there. It's like an encyclopedia. Um, and it's just like the other one that Mel Siff wrote that's phenomenal is the Facts and Fallacies book, which I think just you don't even want to like look at most things that people do in modern exercise because it's just so cringeworthy, and especially after the Facts and Fallacies book, that one's a big game changer. And a third book, like I think that going with some kind of a just a story is a good one, and I don't know why, but I think I've always liked the picture of Dorian Gray, just at a very high level in terms of just a novel.
Oscar Wilde.
Yeah, it's I think that there's some kind of underlying message that connects with me, and I don't know what it is on a subconscious level, but there's something about that book and the way he put it together that just really resonates with me.
Awesome. No, it's a book that kind of, it also makes you think, right? And what would you do if you were in the same situation? And
Yeah.
it is. I heard a quote and it kind of resonated with me. One of my Facebook friends, David Wu, sent it out, and he said, regardless if you're distracted or if you're busy, you're still running out of time. And I'm just like, holy shit.
Yeah, it's kind of epic.
Yeah, yeah. But Brian, I think is that the majority?
Well, I got one more.
One more. All right.
Let's roll the red carpet out for this baby.
What is your take on handstands?
What?
Which this is a shot at Claude, but anyways.
All right, so this is like I don't know. I'm trying to think of where this started from. Like I guess that it's more like I'm a big movement person in all honesty. Like I love biomechanics, and I really like to be able to try to break down what makes someone a good mover versus someone that's struggling to be able to execute movements with fluidity. And there's a lot of people out there in our field that would say that they are movement-based people. And I think that there's like, it's real easy to see great movement, and it's really easy to see bad movement. And it's almost like cancer. You know what I mean? Like if someone has like a tremendous tumor growth and metastasis, it's very easy to find that. And same thing, if someone is like a terrible mover, like you can see that a mile away, and it's kind of like it's really hard to find the origins of cancer when someone first has it, and it's also very difficult to spot the origins of movement dysfunction in someone that's a fairly competent mover. And it's really easy to correct some movement strategies in someone that's in the beginnings of movement dysfunction, and it's very easy to eradicate cancer if you catch it super early. Now, on the flip side, like if cancer is very well established and has spread, it's almost impossible to get rid of it. And the same thing is true for movement dysfunction. And I think that appreciating them on this big movement related things on a big picture realm is critically important. And that I would say that movement defies our ability to fully conceptualize overall. But I think that one thing that we want to rely on is objective testing. And I use objective tests when I'm trying to figure out someone's motor capabilities. And I've seen enough instances of what sorts of strategies actually improve objective movement testing results. And generally they're like things that like allow the rib cage to internally rotate, and you see a pelvis go into posterior tilt, and you're able to get rotation in the transverse plane taking place through a rib cage, and you're able to see frontal plane activity through a pelvis and a foot and ankle complex. Like those to me are the things where I'm like, when I start seeing those activities, I'm thinking to myself, okay, this person's objective movement tests are going to be improving. And then, I think that there's people that like, I don't know what they subscribe to. I don't pay attention to a lot of things but there's a lot of movement people that would do things like along the lines of handstands. And then it's kind of, they give explanations for why they are doing handstands, and they're saying things along the lines of like, well, it's going to improve other things, like other movement capabilities, or it's going to improve like overhead pressing strength and all this stuff. And my contention is that there are better tools for the job to improve the secondary things that you're saying you're improving with handstands. I think that if if your goal is to get better at handstands or things like hand walking, you should train with specificity and do handstands and hand walking. If your goal is to improve other motor qualities, I don't see any way in which a handstand would transfer over to those other things, in large part because it's going to anterior tilt a pelvis, externally rotate a rib cage. You're going to see anterior translation of a thorax, hyperextension of a neck. It's a confusing position for an organism to exist in if you're trying to improve, like, typically like bipedal motor strategies. So
Which
it's kind of like, yeah,
like if you want to press something overhead while you're on your feet, practice
that.
pressing something overhead while you're on your feet.
right.
Right. No, I totally get it.
So it's not that I'm anti-handstand. It's just like, I think that, like, somebody could say the same thing, and their rationale for why they're doing it, to me, determines whether or not I think that person is stupid or smart. And it's like, if you're telling me that you're doing handstands because you want to do handstands and you like to do handstands and you're doing a handstand, I think you're smart. If you're telling me that you're doing handstands because you're trying to be a better mover, I think you're an idiot. So it's that. That's what it comes down to.
Which it makes sense. I mean, if you're looking for one thing to carry over to everything, unfortunately, life doesn't work like that, or else everybody would be doing one exercise in the gym, nothing else.
Yeah. So just appreciate that, like, some things have more power than others. Like specificity is a principle of training. If it makes it up to the level of being a principle, then it's there for the long haul, and it's a meaningful thing. And you're going to have to play within the confines of these rules according to specificity. And when you can really fully grasp why you're getting better at something and how it fits into the principle of specificity, you're starting to make the connections intellectually and intelligently from a training science standpoint.
Well put.
Beautiful. Mr. Pat, it has been an absolute pleasure having you on today. I appreciate your time and you sharing your knowledge bombs and wisdom with us.
Well, Brian and Claude, this has been great, man. You guys are a lot of fun, and I really appreciate you giving me a chance to talk and hopefully not bore 6 people to death.
Well, we lost one, so now it's 5. But it's okay. But I know we really appreciate it, man. Like, this is a ton of fun. Like I said, we're gonna have to do a round 2 because we didn't even scratch the surface on some things.
I'd be happy to. Yeah, anytime you guys want to do it. Yeah.
Totally. We can double team you again.
This podcast, we dive so deep, and yet we end on such a shallow note.
Actually, yeah, when we dive deep and then we just go low.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I kind of like that juxtaposition, and I got to tell you, ever since I was a little boy, I've been waiting for this moment for 2 guys I've never met to just double team me, and it's been a real special experience. I got to tell the audience, like, you guys haven't lived until you've let Brian and Claude double team you.
Yep. And it's better now when you're grown up than if you're like an altar boy being double teamed.
I wouldn't have known what to do with that. Yeah, I wouldn't have been ready for it.
No,
I wouldn't have appreciated it.
Exactly. And now,
in this season of Christmas, it seems like
the season of giving.
Exactly. And receiving. Like, I think that we have to.
And receiving. Yeah. I think that one's underrated, really.
Totally.
Yeah. No, give a little, take a little.
Critical, yeah.
Gentlemen,
right, guys.
It's been a pleasure.
Well, we'll catch you later, and thank you everyone for listening to the Optimum
or not
podcast. Yeah, or just cutting off as soon as you heard double team. All right.
Thanks again, Pat.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks for listening to the Optimum Human Podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please remember to head on over to iTunes and give a 5-star rating and review, which will help spread the word to more awesome listeners just like you. Head on over to theoptimumhuman.com and subscribe to the free newsletter and get the Optimum Human's Blueprint to the Optimum Life. Download it instantly. Thanks for listening.